Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, where we take up the articles from the Hindu and discuss them as per the demands of civil services examination. The topics of the discussion are listed on your screen. Now moving on to the first article of the day that has featured on page 6 of the Hindu, basically talks about the issue of corruption. Now recently in a judgment that was made by Supreme Court, the constitutional bench of Supreme Court came down heavily on corruption among the public servants in the country and lowered the bar for quantum of evidence that is required to convict person which is charged with corruption. The court has now laid down that even if prosecution witness turns hostile, a conviction would be in order if all the circumstantial evidence marshalled by the prosecution and produced before the court points towards the guilt of the accused. Now, this step is seen as a great step in ensuring integrity in the public services, especially in the superior services like that of IAS and IPS. Now, with the help of this article, we'll try to analyze the issue of corruption from an ethical perspective, as the GS4 syllabus has mentioned about the challenges of corruption under the topic probity in governance. Under this article, we'll first try to understand what basically corruption is, why it is wrong, what is the effect of corruption, what are the features of corruption in India. Secondly, we'll try to understand what are the reasons behind the corruption as identified by the second ARC. We'll also try to understand what are the present legislative measures to counter corruption in India. And at the last, we'll also try to understand what are the steps forward that have been recommended by the second ARC or the second Administrative Reform Commission to tackle the menace of corruption in India. Now the word corrupt is derived from Latin word corruptus, meaning to break or destroy. Now the corruption can be grand corruption, which involve person in the high places, or also can be in retail in its nature, wherein it may touch everyday life of common people. An example of this can be given the grand corruption at the level of Commonwealth gain and the retail corruption or the petty corruption that happens every day with regards to bribes taken at lower levels by traffic police personnel and so on. Now this brings us to the question, why corruption is wrong per se. Now corruption is a betrayal of trust as it violates the social contract between the subject, that is the citizens of the country, and that of the state. Further, the corruption also amounts to abuse of power and is a violation of virtue ethics. With the powers that are vested in the hands of few, the power has now been abused, and thus corruption goes against the very virtue of justice also. Thirdly, corruption is a violation of rights of the subjects, which amounts to denial of justice or leads to spread of injustice in the society. Further, the role modeling of the government officials goes against the categorical imperative of the Kant, as now the government officials are not looked as a symbol of trust, but rather the aspiration of becoming a government official is to amass wealth. Lastly, the corruption also goes against the concept of greatest good of greatest number, which is one of the main objectives of the state, as corruption leads to concentration of wealth in the hands of few or in the hands of those in power and denies the rightful share of people that can be utilized in their development. Now that we have discussed what is corruption and why corruption is wrong, we'll try to understand the effect of corruption on the system. Now the effect of corruption on the system can be categorized in 4 different ways. The first is the snowballing effect. Now, the snowballing effect is that the correct behavior tends to grow out to bigger ones. Once corruption becomes legitimized in a system, it keeps on increasing, and this has been observed in the case of India also. The offenses which starts with petty corruption results in large-scale corruption at the offices and rather at last leads to its institutionalization. Further, another effect of corruption on the system is the contamination, as it infects the non-corrupt persons or the non-corrupt public officials that are working in that department, as now the non-corrupt public officials are attracted by the wealth that is amassed through corrupt means. Another effect of corruption on the system is that it leads to revelation. Now, when the corruption instances are revealed in the front of larger public by media, then it leads to dilution of public trust and thus breaks the trust and the intimate relations between the citizenry and that of government, therewith undermines the democracy itself. At last, corruption also leads to radiation, meaning thereby corruption in any organ of organization damages the reputation of whole organization. It can also be seen as corruption by one ministry damaging the picture of the government as whole, or corruption by any one department of the organization decreasing the public faith in the organization per se. Now, corruption can be also tracked through its feature in India. The features of corruption in India are quite significant to analyze. The first feature of corruption in India is that it is majorly in the upstream section. The National Commission to review the working of the Constitution has analyzed the following features. The first of which is the upstream feature of the corruption. That is, the corruption at the top levels is much more when compared to the corruption at the bottom levels. This is also due to the structure of the organization and the disposal of power, which we will discuss later as the reasons behind the corruption. Another basic feature of corruption in India that is it has got wings and not wheels, meaning thereby the money that is siphoned off through corruption or that is earned through corruption is generally smuggled abroad and it is brought back in India through legitimate means and it is reinvested back in India, highlighting or promoting is at white investment. This is also known commonly as the phenomena of round tripping. Another feature of corruption in India is it is highly rewarding activity. Corruption in India is a low risk, high reward activity and thus it often leads to promotion in the system rather than attracting the prison, which should be the ideal end of corruption. Further, the corruption also breeds inequality. As we have seen in our discussion that why corruption is wrong, it goes against the concept of greatest good of greatest number. It also leads to accumulation of wealth in the hands of few, which ultimately leads to inequality in the society as the money that could have been utilized for the development of the public at large has not found the public space. This brings us to the question that what are the reasons behind such high levels of corruption in India, and the Second Administrative Reforms Commission has analyzed the following as the reasons behind corruption in India. The first reason behind corruption in India, as identified by the second ARC, is of colonial legacy. Now, we often hear terms like that of colonial hangover. Now, the colonial legacy causes corruption in India because the colonial system that has been created in the form of modern day bureaucracy has led to disposal of discretionary powers in the hands of few. Now, the bureaucracy in India is extremely powerful and is given discretionary powers, and this has been provided as a result of colonial legacy that was present in India. This has also led to enormous asymmetry of power in our society today. Another reason that has been identified by the Second Administrative Reform Commission is that of over-regulation and over-centralization to be looked together. Over-regulation in the forms of rules, procedure, and anarchic laws are there, which also give boost to corruption, as the alternative to these rules are given in the form of corruption or through bribery, and in this process the institution of bribery becomes institutionalized. There is over-centralization of power in the hands of few, which leads to the culture of yes man in the organization, and also decision making without any checks, which results in the formation of absolute power without having any checks. And in common parlance, it is used that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Another reason identified by the second ARC is the lack of strong public opinion against the corruption. It also analyzed that there is a societal acceptance of corruption in general in India, and corruption at the level of government and those in power is generally accepted by people in India at large, and there is lack of any strong public opinion against the same. Another reason highlighted by the second ARC is the inadequate laws to deal with the corruption, undue protection given to the civil servants under Article 311, wherein it says that the civil servants can only be removed by the appointing authority, which makes the activity low risk and high reward, as the procedure of removal is very cumbersome. And as the last issue highlighted by the second ARC is that of collusion of politicians, business, and that of bureaucracy, which we see in the form of crony capitalism in our society. Now that we have discussed the reason identified for corruption in India by second ARC, we'll try to understand what are the legal provisions today in India to counter the menace of corruption. Now, the first principal legislation to counter corruption in India is that of Prevention of Corruption Act 1988. This act consolidates all the laws that are related to corruption by the civil servants in the country and punishes the offense of bribery and procurement of illegal assets by the public servants. The second law is that related to Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, or commonly known as the FCRA Act of 2010. And this act aims to prohibit the foreign dealings and regulating the foreign contribution in the country by certain specified persons, which includes that of judge, government servants, employees of the government, member of legislature of the state, as well as that of the parliament. The next act that was passed to tackle the menace of corruption after the most famous Andolan, which was led by social activist Shri Anna Hazare, was that of Lokpal and the Lokayukt Act of 2013. And it empowered to inquire the complaints received against the corruption in the public functionaries, under which the Prime Minister of India also has been brought under its ambit. The next legal legislation to counter corruption in India is the Prevention of Money Laundering Act that was passed in 2002. This is regarded as the most effective and powerful statute in the field of corruption in India, as the act defines money laundering, and under the act, the agencies have also been given power to confiscate and attach the properties of the accused person. Thus, is seen as a step to counter the menace of corruption. Further, the Central Vigilance Commission Act has also been passed, under which the Central Vigilance Commissioner's Office has been established to keep supervision on all the anti-corruption agencies of the country along with that of CBI. Government of India also passed the Fugitive Economic Offenders Act in 2018 to counter cases where the economic offences have been committed and to bring to justice the criminals who have fled from India to escape the prosecution. The government has also brought in the Black Money, Undisclosed Foreign Income and Assets Act in 2015, and under this act, heavy penal rates of tax on any undisclosed asset or evasion of any income that is held abroad by a person is imposed upon, and it also lays down the provisions for punishment regarding the non-disclosure of income. So these were the principal legislation that are present in India to counter corruption. At the last, we'll try to understand what way forward has been suggested by the Second Administrative Reform Commission to counter corruption in India. Now, the second ARC has made three distinctions. It has suggested reforms related to legal infrastructure, social infrastructure, and has also made some of the systematic recommendations to tackle corruption in India. The recommendation for legal reforms is related to enlarging the scope of corruption under the Prevention of Corruption Act. Secondly, the second ARC has recommended to deal with the issue of collusive corruption that is prevalent in India. It has recommended that offense to be classified as collusive if the outcome or the intended outcome of the transaction leads to loss to the state or public interest. The second ARC also recommended some of the changes in the constitution which are listed as constitutional measures and recommended Article 310 and 311 to be repealed. And at last, it also recommended institutional recommendation which includes guidelines like Lokayukta at all the three levels of the government, and apart from that, presence of own cadre and own recruitment and training facilities for them. Apart from the legal reforms, second ARC has also made recommendations regarding changes in the social infrastructure to curb corruption in India. The first of the recommendation among this is that is the changes in the citizen charter. Citizens should be involved in the assessment and the maintenance of government institutions and the offices. It also recommends a reward scheme to be introduced to incentivize citizens' initiative. It also recommended adoption of measures that are related to social audit and also introduction of a legislation on the lines of US False Claim Act that provides for citizens as well as the civil society groups to seek legal relief against fraudulent claims against the government to check any illicit move. As a last step of reform, the second ARC also recommended systematic recommendations to curb corruption. The first among that was reducing monopoly in the system, as monopoly invariably leads to corruption and leads to a situation of abuse of power. It also recommended restructuring the centrally sponsored scheme, providing a single window clearance system, introduction of concept of positive silence. Now the principle of positive silence needs to be adopted as per the second ARC. Whenever the permission licenses are to be issued, there should be a time limit for processing of the same, after which the permission should be deemed to be have given. And if the time limit is breached, the officials who are responsible for delays should be held in charge. It also recommended that decision making on important matters should be assigned to a committee rather than individual. It also recommended changes to be brought in under the annual performance report or the APR of each officer, and there should be inclusion of a column where officers should indicate the measures he took to control corruption in his office and among the subordinates. Second ARC also recommended suo motu disclosure of information within the ambit of Right to Information Act, risk profiling of jobs to be done in a more systematic and institutionalized manner in all the government organizations, capacity building in the anti-corruption agencies, maintenance of a national database containing details of all corruption cases at all the levels to be created, and this database should be open or kept in the public domain. And it also recommended an online complaint tracking mechanism or the system for external and periodic mechanism of audit of complaint in offices that are having large public interest. With this, we have seen the recommendations that have been made by the second ARC in regard with the legal, social infrastructure and systematic recommendations to tackle corruption. We have also seen the reasons for the corruption, its effect, the principal legislations presently in India to counter the same. Moving on to the next article of the day that is featured on page 13 of the Hindu basically talks about the young professional scheme and the agreement related to which was signed between the government of India and that of UK. Now this topic is particularly important with respect to the GS2 syllabus of UPSC mains, as it specifically mentions policies of the developed and the developing countries and its impact on that of India. Now during our discussion on this topic, we will not only cover the features of the young professional scheme, but we will also try to analyze the bilateral relationship between India and that of United Kingdom in detail, as the signing of the agreement between the two countries, that is the young professional scheme, bellies down more complex issues around the movement of persons across the border. This was part of Migration and Mobility Agreement of 2021, which has sought to address the return of illegal migrants to their home countries. Further, the topic between India and UK is also important, as a free trade agreement between the two countries which both the governments of India and UK were hoping to conclude before Diwali, was complicated and has not been signed up till yet. We'll try to analyze what are the reasons behind such complication and what is the need for signing the FTA between India and UK. First, we'll try to understand the Young Professional Scheme. Now, the government of India and UK marked the Pravasi Bharati Divas by kicking off the Young Professional Scheme. Now, this scheme will permit 3,000 of their degree-holding citizens that are aged between the age group of 18 to 30 to live as well as work in each other's country for a period of 2 years. Secondly, the scheme will allow the young Indians and the Britons to be able to travel to each other's countries either for work, study, visit for the period of 2 years as we have already discussed. The scheme further allows for exchange visas for up to 3,000 individuals per year. And a successful candidate when selected under the scheme could look for a job, educational or cultural opportunity once they are arriving in the host country, or they could also just visit the country per se. Now that we have discussed what is the Young Professional Scheme, we'll try to analyze the India and UK relations in detail. Now, the topic related to India and UK relations have been comprehensively covered in the Focus magazine in the November 2022 edition, when Rishi Sunak in the month of October was elected as the Prime Minister of the UK. Now, Rishi Sunak is the UK's first Asian origin non-white Prime Minister to be elected for the top post. And he is also the youngest Prime Minister in over 200 years. With the election of Rishi Sunak as the Prime Minister of the UK, the Sunak's vision for India-UK bilateral ties has gone beyond. As during his campaign, Rishi Sunak was very vocal in transforming the India-UK relationship and make it a more two-way exchange that opens up easy access to UK students in India and UK companies and Indian companies to work together. We'll try to analyze the various features of India-UK relationship now. The first feature of India-UK relationship is related to trade. Now, the merchandise trade between India and UK was close to $15.5 billion in the year 2019-20, with trade balance in the favor of India. So, UK is one of the countries with which India enjoys a positive trade balance. Further, India is the second largest source of foreign direct investment after the US in UK. And UK, on the other hand, is the sixth largest investor in India. Now, apart from trade, both the countries also complement each other in the field of climate change. India and UK have also launched the Green Growth Equity Fund to mobilize institutional investment in the sector of renewable energy, waste management, and to promote electric mobility and its various subsectors in India. Both the countries have also agreed to partnership under the Green Grids, that is, One Sun, One World, One Grid initiatives under the International Solar Alliance and the IRIS platform under CDRI. Further, the Indian diaspora in UK is one of the largest ethnic minority communities in the country, which includes approximately 1.6 million British nationals of Indian origin, which contributes 6% to their GDP and roughly 2.5% of their population. Further, both the countries share multilateral cooperation initiatives with each other. UK has been supportive of India's permanent membership in the United Nations Security Council and has voted favorably in the rollover decision on UNSC reforms. UK is also a strong supporter of India's membership to the NSG or the Nuclear Supplier Group, MTCER, Australia Group, and the Wassenaar Agreement. Further, both the countries also co-chairs the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure and are partners under the International Solar Alliance. Apart from this, India and UK also share defense relationship and have signed Defense and International Security Partnership Agreement in 2015 to provide a strategic roadmap and direction to the evolving India-UK defense relationship. Both the countries also conduct various military exercises. Despite having the multi-pronged nature of partnership between India and UK, Both the countries have not been able to resolve some of the key issues over signing of FTA, as we have already discussed in the very beginning, as it was to be concluded by Diwali. We'll first try to understand why FTA is necessary between India and that of United Kingdom. The agreement is important because both the countries aims to double the bilateral trade of goods and services between themselves to $100 billion by 2030. Further, there has been signs of improvement. As for the data released by the UK government, the total trade in goods and services between UK and India have increased by roughly 35%, and the growth of trade between India and UK has surpassed that of UK and China. However, when it comes to the value of trade between UK and India, it is approximately 1/4 of trade between UK and China. Further, the FTA is also important between India and UK as it can broaden the scope of bilateral trade, as currently 70% of India-UK trade is dominated by services and the service sector, and the proposed India-UK FTA would ultimately cover 90% of the tariff lines. With the goal of realizing bilateral trade of $100 billion by 2030, FTA is thus very important. Now we'll try to see what are the issues that are concerning or impinging India and UK FTA. The first issue that have been highlighted or creating a deadlock between India and UK is the norms related to data localization and the UK companies being allowed to bid for Indian government contracts, causing a deadlock in the final stages of India-UK free trade agreement. The second issue that is highlighted here between India and UK is on the negotiations related to key issues of mobility and migration. During our discussion in the beginning, we have seen that the issue of mobility and migration, which allows the return of illegal migrants to their home state, which was signed between India and UK in the year 2021, still remains elusive, as the Migration and Mobility Partnership excludes trade in services through movement of natural persons. And this is a cause of deadlock between India and UK. Another sticky area between India and UK related to FTA is attributed to that of insurance sector and the India's regulatory policies in the insurance sectors. Further, India has failed to commit to ratify and implement all of the norms of the ILO on labor, including those negotiating power of the trade unions. And this does not go well with that of United Kingdom. Further, the analysis by various economists reveal that UK is willing to give or agree on merchandise tariffs, given that the tariffs in UK are anyway much lower, but the market access that UK will promise in legal and financial services remains to be unseen. So these were the issues that are plaguing the FTA at the final stages between India and that of UK. Now, at last, we'll try to understand what brings the two countries closer. Apart from the target of reaching $100 billion of trade between India and UK by 2030, there are various other areas of convergence between India and UK. Both the countries view Indo-Pacific as an emerging theatre of geopolitics, and it provides thus an opportunity for India and UK to work closely. Secondly, post-Brexit and the meritocratic immigration policies that have been announced by UK, along with the move to co-sponsor a motion calling out Pakistan's failure to prevent financing of terrorism, has helped put the relationship on a healthier footing between India and UK. Both the countries, that is India and UK, have realized that alone US is not capable of constraining China. Further, another cause of convergence between India and UK ties is that among the countries like Japan, Australia and France, UK still remains a relatively untapped strategic partner for India. UK, on the same time post-Brexit, is trying to diversify its economic partners, and India thus can play a crucial role. In the area of cybersecurity, UK and India have been working multilaterally under the proposed G10 to combat Huawei lead in the 5G. And both the countries, as we have discussed already, are also partnering in the issues of climate change, for example, the Green Grid Initiative and the One Sun, One World, One Grid at the Glasgow Summit in COP26. The countries have also agreed to partnership in the areas of global health initiatives, and such a partnership was seen during the COVID between the Oxford University, AstraZeneca, and India Serum Institutes. And this serves as a blueprint for further cooperation between India and UK. Thus, the changing geopolitics and emergence of a multipolar world, which will be supplemented by multi-alignments which both India and UK are seeking, brings the two countries closer. With this, we have covered the scheme as well as have discussed the relationship between India and UK and also the issues that are plaguing the FTA between the two countries and the need for signing. Moving on to the next article of the day that has featured on page 7 of the Hindu, basically talks about the finances of the municipal corporation. Now, the RBI report, which was published in the year 2021, titled as the Report on Municipal Finances, reveals how municipal bodies are increasingly dependent on fund transfers from the state as well as that from the center, while their revenue earning capacity is severely limited. Now, this topic is important under the GS2 syllabus, which mentions function and responsibilities of the union and the states, and also mentions power and finances up to the local levels and challenges therein. In our discussion, we will try to understand what the article wants to convey, that is, what are the issues related to finances of municipal corporation as analyzed under the report, as it shows that the combined budget of all the municipal corporation in India is much smaller than that of central and state governments, and also says that 70% of the funds that are raised are spent on salaries, pensions, and administrative expenses, with very less left for the capital expenditure. From the infographic, we will try to understand what the report wants to convey. The first thing that the report wants to convey is that the taxes earned by the municipal corporations are grossly inadequate to meet the expenditure needs, meaning thereby the own tax revenue of municipal corporation, which comprises of property tax, water tax, toll tax, and other local tax, from just 31 to 34% of their total revenue in the financial year 1820. And this share was low when compared to many other countries and has also declined over the time. The next thing that the report indicates is the comparison with the other countries. Using the budgetary data from municipal corporations across India, the RBI report had concluded that the overall revenue received, which consists of own tax and own non-tax revenue as well as transfers, is estimated to be around 0.61% of GDP only. And this is much smaller when compared to that of countries like Brazil, which is at 7% of the GDP, and other BRICS nations like that of South Africa, which is at 6% of their GDP. The chart also indicates the variation in the municipal earnings of different states. The own tax revenue of municipal corporation as share of state's GDP crossed 1% mark in Delhi, Gujarat, Chandigarh, Maharashtra and Chhattisgarh, while it was less than 0.1% in Karnataka, Goa, Assam and Sikkim. Further, the third chart indicates the dependence on the property taxes. In 2017-18, the property tax formed over 40% of the municipal corporation own tax revenue. Despite such dominance of the property tax in the tax collection ratio, the property tax collection in India is much lower when compared to the other OECD countries due to undervaluation and poor administration. At last, the report also highlights less capital expenditure. Over 70% was spent on revenue expenditure such as salaries, wages, bonus, that is 25%, operational and maintenance charges around 16%, pensions around 7%, while less than 30% was spent on capital expenditure. The report also highlights that the corporation are mostly dependent on transfers, with their revenue raising potential being limited. With this, we have covered the challenges that have been faced by the municipal corporations in India, specifically related to their finances as explained by the RBI report. The report also suggests there is a need for increasing the finances towards the urban local bodies to realize their true potential and the ideals as enshrined under the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act by increasing the fiscal transparency and the utilization of budget by urban local bodies, revival of the municipal bond market, introduction of green finance and infrastructure finance mechanism, utilizing measures like land-based financing, incorporation of private sector partnership along with the public sector partnership, revenues that are being assigned to the urban local bodies from the state governments needs to be increased. Further, the report also suggests allocation of a share of state and center's GST proceeds to the urban local bodies, and at the level of urban local bodies themselves, increasing the cost recovery levels through improved user charges regimes and realization with correct valuation of property tax would not only improve the services but also improves the financial vitality of the urban local bodies and will play the role as envisaged by the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act.